You know, as usual, for those of you who have been here before when I was here, I'm eager to get to the dialogue part of this where we can deal with what you want to think about instead of having to guess at it in a long, ruminating, direct presentation. That having been said, I will spend some time trying to prod you in the direction I'd like you to go with your questions. And when we get to the questions, you'll find that nobody in America is better at receiving questions than I am. I'm a little weak on giving answers, but I'm wonderful at receiving all sorts of questions. I think the last time I told you that I was always in a position where I had to brace myself for introductions because for reasons I'm not fully able to explain, over the years, introductions have savaged me, inadvertently most of the time, but occasionally deliberately. The worst that ever happened to me with Pat Moynihan and President Reagan. But recently I had a reminder of how difficult introductions can be for the ego. This actually happened. You may recall that in 1994 I was elected a private citizen by the people of the state of New York. And I was given the option of keeping the security. That's a privilege that they offer former governors, at least for a while. And I said, no, I'd rather, go back to the streets where I came from. And I enjoy, frankly, the privacy and the freedom that comes from not having people on your tail all the time. But inconveniences come too, especially when you're accustomed for 12 years to people doing everything for you. And so there I am in Kennedy Airport having to schlep like everybody else on the way to San Diego. And I'm online waiting for a plane, and behind me, a few people back, a couple, well-tanned, nice-looking, a woman and a man. I guessed they were Californians. The tan had something to do with it. Their eagerness to leave New York had something to do with it. And the woman was kind of looking at me and then turning to the man with her and then looking at me again. And I thought I'd relieve her curiosity. And so I turned around, leaned over, and I said, "How do you do, madam?" Shook her hand. And she said, "Aren't you were in politics?" Yes, I was in politics. She said, you have an Italian name." I said, "Oh, yes, distinctly Italian, very Italian." She said, "Oh, I knew. Sonny Bono, right?" That's the truth. It actually happened. I said, no, not Sonny Bono. Sonny Bono's a little guy, mean guy. No, I'm not Sonny Bono. I didn't tell her who I was. I was going to say I'm Al D'Amato, but I didn't say that. And I didn't say to some people we all look alike, although I was thinking it. I didn't say that at all. I just felt a little humiliated, to be honest with you. But tonight Susan Engel got the name right, and I'm delighted, especially tonight, because the name means more to me tonight than it has in a while, because the name was used over and over earlier today on East 13th Street at Genesis Housing, where the Vice President of the United States came to pay homage to this wonderful idea, which is Genesis Housing, and to some people called Cuomo. Andrew Cuomo, Maria Cuomo Cole, my daughter, who now runs this project. Andrew Cuomo thought it up, brought it into existence. He's now an assistant secretary at HUD. And Matilda Cuomo, who has a mentoring program there. And some of you may be familiar with the word quell. Well, I was quelling all through this. It was a wonderful day, and I felt reassured by it, reinvigorated by it, not just because they were saying nice things about the people in my family. I've grown accustomed to that over the years. But because the idea of what was happening was being honored. And the idea of what was happening is very important to this country. Ethel Kennedy was there as well. She was there with Matilda. And she joined in because this affordable housing program was being renamed for Robert Kennedy. And that meant something too. That kind of thing hasn't happened a lot in recent days in our politics. It's not happening at all in the campaign, not even from the Democratic side. People saying that, maybe you can do some good things with government. Maybe it's not true that government is always bad or always fails to improve things. Maybe every once in a while government can light the fire of responsibility and someone that needs help then having inspired responsibility, give them a little hand and produce a good result. That's what relief was before AFDC, Aid to Families with Dependent Children. There was relief at the time of the Depression. There was relief when Andrea Cuomo came from Italy, a ditch digger who was illiterate, ignorant, had no friends, had no job. There was relief. We'd give you bread if you'd work for it. Work on a project for the people of this country, and you can earn your shelter and your bread. Not a bad idea. It was all right for Andrea and Immaculata, my mother, and it got them started. And Genesis works even better. It's set up in some previously abandoned buildings with a small grant, actually, from state government. Now it's paid for by tenants who used to be jobless but have been helped to find work with some training and some education. It's not a handout, it's a hand up. It's not a stifling government attempt to do for people what they ought to be doing for themselves. It's an intelligent, stimulating program that helps them help themselves, making them productive instead of dependent. And the spirit was upbeat, it was positive, it was effective. The people there felt good about themselves. Not so long ago, before this program, people like the people there at Genesis were in the Martinique. Do you remember the Martinique? Do you remember that hellhole? Do you remember that trap? Do you remember the filth and the stories? Do you remember reading and being angered by the fact that we were paying $35,000 a year to keep people in that travesty of a place? Well, Andrew Cuomo got an idea. He said, gee, we don't need to do all of that. We can find a place for the homeless people that'll be a lot cheaper and a lot better for them. And he invented it. It's called HELP. Now his sister Maria runs it. And the affordable housing program was an outgrowth of that. Altogether, a very good thing. Take my word for it. The vice president's no fool. He wouldn't have tread on this dangerous ground where words like progressive were being used. And if you listen closely, even somebody in the back whispered just once when I walked in, a liberal. You know, but he didn't say it loud. The vice president knew that this was a particularly good program. And so I felt good about it. But think about it. Have you heard that kind of talk in the campaign anywhere? No. What you hear from both sides is big government. The era of big government is over. Now, the era of big government that doesn't work should be over. Of course it should. It should always have been over. It should never have started. Who wants big government whose only virtue is it's big? We don't want big anything. We don't want big linemen who can't tackle. We don't want big basketball players who can't put the ball in the hole. I don't want a big wife who can't cook and be nice with me. I don't want anything that's big. There's no virtue in just being big. I understand that. No, but it's a symbol for something else. What they're really saying is we don't want any government. And the less government, the better. And that's popular. As a matter of fact, what's popular right now, let's be candid. I'm a Democrat. I'm with Clinton. He has to win because he's much closer to the truth than the other side. There is no question about that. But it's also very clear that what has happened to both sides is that they have made the calculation probably accurate that in order to win, the maximum chance for victory comes in the form of saying, I'm not going to ask you to do anything uncomfortable. I'm not going to ask you to do anything for anybody. And I'm not going to ask you to give anything up. And when you hear from me, it will be either innocuous or it will be giving you something. But never will I ask you to take less than you're currently receiving. Never will I ask you to give more than you're currently giving under any circumstance. We're inventing a new kind of politics. It is absolutely sacrifice-free. Easy for everybody simultaneously. You don't believe it? Just look at the issues that are being mentioned. My favorite has become same-sex marriage. Because I wondered to myself, where did this come from? Why are they arguing about same-sex marriage? What are there long lines of women waiting for other women, and shunning all kinds of men, or, dying to get married and legitimating it and saying, when did it become a big issue? Well, Hawaii has a law, so what? So let them pass the law, and then it's going to go to the Supreme Court, and then you'll see what's happened. There's a whole process for this. Why are you speeding it up? Why are you making a thing about it? Because you took a poll and it said 58% of the American people would be outraged at the notion Why? Because it violates their traditional impulses. I understand that. I understand it well. And so they used to make rules like that and use issues like that when blacks and whites first decided they were both human beings, maybe sufficiently so that they could live together in a married condition. That shocked a lot of people. That's unnatural, they said. It wasn't meant that way. God didn't mean it that way. And it became an issue that got used opportunistically, and I think that's what's happened with same-sex marriage, too. Wherever you are on it is for another time. But why did it have to be such an urgent issue? Aren't there more important things? Aren't there 47 million people without health care? It was 37 million when we tried curing the problem a few years ago. And now it's only getting worse. Aren't there roads and bridges that are deteriorating? Isn't there a little girl right now somewhere in a street in South Jamaica, outside at 4 years of age in the rain because there's nobody home to care for her? Isn't it true that little girls like her are growing up all over America? You've heard me describe them, 2.5-year-old toddlers out in the streets of places like South Jamaica, surrounded by pimps and prostitutes and debasement of all kind, growing up without ever having heard the sound of an orchestra, but familiar already with the sound of gunfire? Isn't that happening every day? Don't they grow up to be 13, not know what to do with their life, so they make a baby because it's the best thing they can think of? No point in waiting around to marry one of these guys. They're on their way to jail because they're all on their way to jail thanks to drug addiction, drug business, drug culture. No point in going to school and studying because, first of all, they're going to shoot at you in school. The ceiling is falling. There are no books in the library. I don't know why on the other side of town in another public school, everything's great and they have a library. And I said another public school. I didn't say a yeshiva or St. Monica's or a private academy. In another public school, everything's better than here. I don't know how that happened. The same money. All I know is there's no point in going to my school. And even if I did get through, where am I going to work? Where I come from, I have no real stable family. I'm black or I'm a Latino or I'm a poor person. I come in this culture. You know, it must be that there's no place to go. Look at all the people who are surrendering and doing drugs here. Just go see the prisons. 61,000 prisons Cuomo built. More than all the governors in history of the state of New York together. 61,000, and my people are in them. So what's the point? Let me make a baby. Not for your lousy check, but because then I'll have something to love. And something maybe that will love me in her naivete. Now, she learns differently pretty quickly. Isn't that a problem? Social Security, isn't that a problem? Isn't it going to go away by 2013, or did they make that up? No, they didn't make it up. You know, they're going to take care of me, my children, and people that age. They're going to earn and take care of my Social Security. But when they're 65 years of age, there aren't going to be enough people to take care of them. We all know that. What are we doing about it? We've known it for years. Well, you can't talk about that because you're going to have to ask people to do inconvenient things. How about Medicare? Same problem. Happens sooner. Healthcare costs are multiplying dangerously. What are you going to do about it? Well, the healthcare bill might have helped a little bit by getting people into coverage, getting them in early, so that you didn't have to pay for 37 million people, or most of them, in emergency rooms where the cost is more expensive. You didn't have to pay as much for acute care because you wouldn't have the need for as much acute care, because if everybody was covered, they'd be getting preventive care, and they wouldn't get to acute care, a lot of them. But we lost that battle, so isn't that something we ought to be dealing with? Isn't the environment still a problem? I don't hear you talking about any of them. I did hear you talking about 4.3 cents on a gallon of gasoline. Big argument. What is the argument? They took 4.3 cents from you with a tax. We're going to give it back to you. Hey, listen, I'm not the smartest guy in America, but I'm no fool either. You mean you're going to repeal the 4.3 cents tax on a gallon of gasoline? That's right. We're going to repeal it. And that money's going to come back to me. That's right. May I ask you a question? Sure, go ahead, Mario. How do I know that money's going to come back to me? Why should the guy give me the 4.3 cents back? Is there a control on the price of gas? You think of my father in his grocery store, if they suddenly told him, Andrew, you're selling those potatoes 5 pounds for a quarter. 5 pounds for 25 cents. That's what it used to be. In big black crayon on a bag, on a stick. You put the stick in the bushel of potatoes. 5 Libers, remember? 5 LBSs, 25 cents. Now, you're charging 25 cents, Andrew, because you paid 15 cents, right? But I'm going to tell you, Andrew, now you're only going to have to pay 9 cents. You can give 6 cents back to the customer. Forget about it. What, are you kidding me? Why should I give it back to the customer? Well, we took the tax off. Like, it's not. Just keep your mouth shut. They're used to paying 25 cents. Fine, they'll pay me 25 cents. My father wouldn't have given it back, and the oil company's not going to give it back. But it's a great issue. It sounds like a great issue. There are a lot of them like that. School uniforms is a good one, right? What are you going to do about the education problem? Rudy Giuliani has 90,000 people without school uniforms. Well, what'll that do? What, are you kidding? They'll look terrific as they stand out there waiting for a desk. What all of these things have in common is they don't cost you anything. They're completely safe. Now, for Republicans, it's understandable, because most of the Republicans have some very interesting notions about government. See, their basic understanding is that if you need government, you don't deserve it. Yeah. And they have this very other interesting notion about psychology. They are going to inspire us to make the most of our personal abilities, call forth from us the full acceptance of our personal responsibilities, and induce us, incentivize us to work harder, right? Okay, how do they do that? Well, if you already have a great deal, they incentivize you by offering you more, a tax cut. If you don't have anything, they incentivize you by taking away the little that you stole from your neighbor. For the poor people, the way you give them incentive is you tell them you make one more baby and we don't feed you. You're off the welfare list. For me, who's dealing in stocks and bonds, we want you, Mario, to deal more in stocks and bonds. We're going to give you a capital gains tax cut. Because this way you're rich and you're going to be moved by the prospect of still more wealth. They're poor and they're going to be moved by the prospect of misery. But what about an incentive to that poor person? What about offering them the chance to have a really good job? What about offering them the chance to live in a better community? Why don't you hold that out as a carrot? Why don't you go to them the way Mr. Kessler did when he came to my father, who was a ditch digger, and say, look, I'm going to give you this little abandoned grocery store in Queens. It's not much. It's mine. I live upstairs from it, and it's the Depression, and people don't have a lot of money, and I know you can't read and write English, but if you live in this one big room, you and the kids, just one room behind the store, I won't charge you any rent. And you have the chance, Andrea, if you can learn enough English, and Immaculata can learn to count just a little bit, because I'll be there. And my wife will be there to help you. And if you're willing to work very, very hard, someday you may be able to do it all by yourself without me, your own store. He wouldn't have dared use a word like entrepreneur, but you will be the boss. And Papa said, yes, sir. Let's move out of here from Jersey City. Let's go to this place called Kings, Queens, whatever it is. We will go there and we will work. Why? It's a chance. It's a chance. Yes, I'll make a fool of myself. Yes, I'll be humiliated because I won't be able to speak the language to the people who come to the marble counter. Yes, that'll be hard on me, and it was for a lifetime. He cried when he showed me the little bank book, Andrea Cuomo and Trust for Mario Cuomo, Andrea Cuomo and Trust for Franco Cuomo, my brother, Andrea Cuomo and Trust for Maria Cuomo. This is so you should educate yourself so you're not a stupid like me. This is so you should go to school, so you don't have to have people laughing at you the way they laugh at me when I'm not looking. I know, of course he had to go through all that, but you gave him the chance. Are these people any different, the people who are poor now? I don't think so. So from the Republicans, I don't expect a lot more, but from the Democrats, two parties now sharing a taste for inoffensive solutionettes. What do you do about it? What can you do about it? Well, I think, first of all, what you have to do about it is remind yourselves and then try to remind others exactly what's happening. My mother, who we lost just a little bit ago, right after the election, we lost my mother and my mother-in-law, 94 and 93 years of age. It was an extraordinary thing. They died within weeks of one another. I think, frankly, my mother, who died first, was the reason my mother-in-law kind of chose to die after that. Because, you know, they'd been together for so many years, and when she saw my mother had given it up after 3 years on the machine, I think my mother-in-law said, hey, look, maybe it's time for me to go too. And so they both left us, and it was a sad moment. It's still sad thinking about them, but it gave you the chance to bring back all the old stories about Mama and all the smart things she had said, because surely she was one of the smartest people I ever met. Now, all of her intelligence she communicated to me in Italian, but she said wonderful things, like, for example, you know, she was talking about divorce. Everybody's getting divorced. People in the family were getting divorces. And it was kind of an interesting phenomenon to her, and she mused about it one day and said to me in Italian, you know why the people all get divorces now? And the old people like your father and me, we didn't get divorces? No, Ma, why do they get divorces now? She says, because now when they get married, they think they're supposed to be happy. You know, if you think about it, it's right, isn't it? I mean, if that were the test, you have to be happy all the time. Of course you wouldn't stay married. I mean, how long would it last? Maybe a week. And she also said this. She said, you know, you can reduce the formula for doing anything in life to 2 steps. Now, the first step is decide exactly what it is you're trying to achieve. Decide exactly what your objective is, but have it very clear in your mind. Have no ambiguity about it. Be sure that this is what you want. You want to be a baseball player. You want to own a store. You want to be an artist. You want to get married and have a family. Whatever it is, put it in your mind and be absolutely sure, and nothing competes with it. You got that? That's step 1. Decide what you want to do. Step 2, do it. It was wonderful. And she said, you know, then the hard thing is step 1. Incidentally, it's getting harder and harder for people, right? Because they don't have what your parents had, what my parents had, and a little bit of what I had, which is necessity, which, you know, showed you the road. You didn't have the choices. You didn't have time to figure out what to do. Kessler told my father, I'll give you a chance to do a grocery store. That's it. That's the best offer I've got. I'll take it. Thank you. You know, no options. Now the kids all have options. Young people have options, and it's hard to make up your mind. First thing to do about where we are in America, decide what you want to be as a nation. Decide what your problems really are. And then, if you can, decide you wish to do something about it. So take a good, hard look at America. Where are you at this moment? Well, you're the greatest nation the world has ever seen. There is no question about that. We're greater than it was ever imagined we could be. Probably greater than the Founding Fathers ever imagined we could be. Nobody expected a miracle like this one, certainly not after only 200 years. Put together this refuse, this rabble, this disparate group of people from all over the world. A lot of them not educated, a lot of them criminals, ex-criminals, some of them fine, noble people, but for the most part, you know, common folk who speak different languages or different colors, come from different cultures, and then you say, we're going to try something unique. We're going to ask you to create a government that has the power at the bottom and sends it up, instead of starting with a king and an army, starting with an inherited monarchy. No, we're going to do it a different way. We're going to let you people, all mixed up, polyglot, not educated, all of you, you're going to decide how to run the place. And everywhere in the world they looked and said, fools, fools. You couldn't possibly do it that way. And when they got to the Depression in 1932 and the Civil War before that, people said, yeah, we told you, you're not going to make it. See what's happening to you? Well, we made it. Shocked everybody. So we're the greatest. But there's never been an engine of opportunity like this place. There's nobody as comfortable as we are anywhere. You know that. You've traveled. You know everybody wants to come here, or almost everybody. And not a whole lot of us want to go somewhere else. So there's no question about our grandness, our historic magnificence. That's clear. But we're not nearly what we should be. We're not nearly what we could be. We're not nearly what our strengths and our gifts call for. We have 40 million poor people. we have 50% of our working people making under $35,000. Only 4% of the people make $100,000 or more. And the more people who get rich, incidentally, we have more millionaires and billionaires than ever. That's very good. I'm all for that. More millionaires and billionaires than ever. Mama was right about that, too. I think I told you about Mama and this one, Fortune magazine. She sees a face on the cover. She couldn't read it, but she saw that face. She recognized it. She knew it was Italian. And she said to me, "Chi è?" It was Lee Iacocca. I said, "Lee Iacocca." I'm Italiano. I said, "Yeah, he's Italian." She said, "Well, what was he doing on the magazine?" I said, "He's making $15 million a year and he's complaining. He says it's not enough." Madonna. She said, "What does he do for $15 million in Italian?" I says, "He makes cars for Chrysler." She looked at me. She says, "What's the matter? You can't make a car?" I was the governor of the state of New York. I was her baby. I was the first Italian-American governor in the history of this place. I look, "Ma, I'm the governor." It was my second term. I forget about it. See, to Mama, she didn't come here, committed to being middle class for the rest of her life. No sin in being rich. Now, Lee Iacocca, his people came from Tuscany, boy, and he made it. That's wonderful. Go all the way. That's the American instinct, and that's very good. And so the more millionaires and billionaires we make honestly, that's fine. That's a sign of success. But right now, CEOs are making 150 approximately times what the workers are making. It used to be about 34, 35, 36, 37 times what the workers are making. That gap is growing immensely. Kevin Phillips some years ago wrote a book, The Good Republican, about the middle class is going nowhere. The people who aren't poor enough to be on welfare but not rich enough to be worry-free. Most of us, I guess, middle class, you work because you have to. We're going nowhere. From 45 to 75, when I was a young middle-class person, absolute assurance of ascendancy. I knew that the harder I worked, the higher I'd go. I knew for sure that I'd be better off than my mother and father. And they knew it too, and it was one of the things they were working for, that the next generation will have it better than us. It was called the American Dream. It started right after the Second World War. It ended rather abruptly in the early or mid-70s for a whole lot of reasons. But it was what made the 50s and the 60s so glorious for so many of us. You didn't have to worry. You could marry Matilda while you were still in school. And when Papa said, "How could you? You have no money." "Pa, I've got all scholarships. It's all right. If I can get through to law school, they'll pay the way. And you're going to have babies." "I know I'm going to have babies, Pop. That's why I'm getting married. But I can handle it because when I get out there, boy, there's no stopping you. If you're educated, Pop, you can go all the way in this place. You could do 2, 3 jobs if you wanted to. They were there. You could make everything you wanted to make." Why? Because the United States of America was the only mega economy in the world from 45 to 75. Everybody else had been laid low by the Second World War. You made all the things of value. You sold them. You were the maker and the seller. You were the creditor and the lender. You were the banker. You called your own shots. You could snap your fingers and declare interest rates around the world if you wanted to, basically. That's all gone. Now think of it. You take polls now, and while sure you've made 10 million jobs and the inflation rate is low and the interest rate is low, the middle class is actually making less than it did several years ago. And in your house, you're making less unless you put a couple of more people to work. And you're scared to death because all the polls say that people say that their parents, that their children are going to have it worse than they have it. Right? Isn't that what they say? Well, think about it. Here's America. You and I, the people who have done very well here, who went up that ladder almost automatically in the period of the American Dream, now calling our children to the table, saying, "I have some news for you. It's going to be worse for you than it was for me." You can't do what I did. The middle class, stagnant. That's just the way it is. And let me explain it to you. From 45 to 75, we were dominant. We're no longer dominant. The Japanese and the Germans and all these people, they got all exercised about our dominance. And they started, with that fiery, hot ambition, they started going to work. They were like your father was when he came here 70, 80 years ago. That fiery, hot ambition that built America in the first place, that won the Second World War as underdogs coming from behind, that outbuilt them, outworked them, outfought them because we were so tough. That's what they became. And we got a little soft because we had it so easy. We sat back on our tushes. And the big test of what changed in 1945, when we said made in Japan, it meant if you dropped it on the floor, it broke. 1975, when you said made in Japan, it meant when you closed the car door on that Japanese automobile, it sounded like a bank vault door. And that made all the difference. They took it away from you. But anyway, whatever the reason is, they're low wage rate. It's a world economy now. We've globalized. The plane can get you there in no time. We're in outer space. It's just one small world now, all tied together. And we have to compete with all these people at low wage rates. And we have a high wage rate because we have a higher standard of living. And what has to happen is those wages have to come down so we can compete. Because unless you make and sell to other markets, you can't be very powerful, and it's getting tougher and tougher for us. You're going to have to pay the price, you workers. Get to be an owner and an entrepreneur, then you'll be all right, because it's pretty good, this economy, for owners and entrepreneurs. The corporations are setting records for profits, and that's very good. If you were into mutual funds 3 years ago, you could have made 38, 39% on your money in mutual funds. Stock market is setting records for setting records. So for owners and investors, it's very good. But it's an ironic thing. This is the first time in our modern history where we've had an economy that's this good for owners and investors and this bad for workers. Think about it. You see headlines now, or we did in recent years, that say record earnings announced, 3,000 layoffs too. Now that you never saw before. You saw Bethlehem Steel closes its doors in Lackawanna because steel is lost to America. It's going off somewhere else, and so 10,000 workers are down. So the company went down, you went down, but now the company's going up and you're going down, and some of the workers think the company's going up because I'm going down. And that's new. That's new to America. And the poor people, they're getting poorer. What are you doing about the middle class problem? Nothing. As a matter of fact, if you listen very closely to both the Democrats and the Republicans, they seem to be saying there's nothing you can do. What do you mean there's nothing I can do? Read Thoreau's newest book. Now, he's a brilliant guy from MIT, a really brilliant guy, but unless I read that book incorrectly, he analyzes what's happening and says, in effect, there's nothing that can be done. What do you mean there's nothing that can be? Well, you can't intervene in the free enterprise system. It'll only make it worse. There's nothing we can do. You mean the middle class has to stay stagnant this way? Well, yeah, for the foreseeable future. No kidding. I'm not an economist. I don't understand it. But you're really telling me it can't be done? No, you can't mess with you just can't. What are the Democrats saying? Bob Reich, remember the Secretary of Labor? He says, we ought to do some things here. We ought to go to the corporations. You say this gap is too big. We ought to find ways to move some of that wealth. Or maybe we ought to have education and training. No, you can't do any of those things. That's big government. And anyway, it looks like the wages are going up a little bit. What are you talking about? We're still behind 1987. People are making less than they did in 1987. 50% of the people are making $35,000. 75,000, only 7.6 people in the United States of America are making more than $75,000. How are they going to have families? They're never going to have a Mario Cuomo and Matilda Cuomo family. I did that on $32,000. 5 kids, a Bel Air Chevrolet, a Cape Cod, and trips to the Amish country. You can't do that again. That's gone. I don't want it to be gone. I want it back. You can't come back. You can't do anything about it. You can't do anything about the poor except castigate them, shout at them. Tell them we're going to cut their welfare. If you make one more baby, you're gone. If you don't work after 6 years, 5 years, whatever it is, and we don't care what your excuse is. You could have had 2 jobs, 3 jobs. If you're out of work after 5, you forget about it. You're off the rolls. Excuse me, would you explain to me what are you going to do with that? And the immigrants, the legal immigrants, they're off right now. What? Well, the legal immigrants, what do you mean? You mean the people you invited here who are legal, who are waiting to be citizens? Yeah. Well, what do you mean they're off? Well, if they lose their job and they don't have another job, they don't get anything. What about their children? Forget about it. Very little for them. But, excuse me, just explain to me, why are we doing that? Oh, because if you tell them that, they'll find jobs. Where will they find jobs? You mean all of them now could really be working but choose not to? They have the education, they have the opportunity, they have the training, they have the instinct, they know how to wash themselves, they know how to wash their bodies, they know how to show up, they know how to handle a computer. That's all there. They're just choosing not to work for the lousy money we give them here in New York City, where their housing allowance is less than it would take you to park your car in a garage for a month. And you're telling me they're doing that deliberately. That's all. And there's nothing else you can do. No. Your daughter is an anorexic. Your son is a drug addict. And they tell you on the same day, and you can barely stand the pain of it and the sadness of it. How can it be? I've worked so hard. Matilda, geez, how do you do that? This can't be. Well, you better take care of it, Mario. Well, I'll take care of it tonight. And you just push this kid into the room and say, listen, you bum. They tell me you're on the stuff, the real stuff. A drug addict. Do you know how hard your grandfather worked? Do you know how hard I worked? Let me tell you something, pal. The next time you smoke a Chesterfield cigarette, you're out of here. You're gone. You're no longer my son. I don't recognize you anymore. I'm going to teach you responsibility. You got it? And you won't eat, you throw up. What is this stuff? Baluma, balima, bala. What is this stupid stuff? Here's a chopstick. You eat it right now. And if you don't, you're gone. Out of here. I don't want to hear anything from you. You got it? You two bums? Thank you. You put your jacket on, go back to Matilda. I took care of them. What'd you do? I taught them a lesson in responsibility they will never forget. Really? Is that what you would do? Or would you fall to your knees when you found out and say, Lord, where did I go wrong? What am I doing wrong here? Why should this kid be behaving that way? What wrong signal did I send him? What confusion is there in her mind? Maybe she has a medical problem. Maybe I did something. Maybe I behaved badly. Maybe I twisted her somehow. Maybe this environment is doing it to her. Maybe the fact that I sent that little girl to live in South Jamaica with people piled on top of her with no real opportunity, with a family structure that didn't exist, and showed her pimps and prostitutes and violence. Maybe that's why she wants to make a baby. Maybe I'm at fault for the way I let her live. How dare you say that we have no responsibility for these poor children? They're the only ones who are responsible. You try it as a governor, as I did. You go back to that neighborhood and you talk to them as a governor. And try as hard as you can to be understanding and sweet and let them know that you love them, which is really what I believe is the important message. Tell them that you want to help them and watch them stare at you and then hear it come from their lips like little icicles. What the hell do you know about my problem? I know you lived here. But you didn't have crack, and you didn't have AIDS, and you didn't have drugs, and you didn't have lousy schools, and you didn't have no jobs, and they weren't locking up all the Italian kids when you lived here. And she was right. So what are we doing for the poor people? Nothing. What are we doing for the middle class? Nothing. The saddest of all of this is what we're saying is really, these are like natural disasters. They're unavoidable. There's nothing we can do about it. You must lower your expectations. That's the sadness of it, the sadness of ebbing expectations. You can't have what you want. But what do I want? What am I asking you for? I'm not asking for everybody to be a millionaire or a billionaire. I'm asking for those 16 million poor children to have a better shot. I'm asking for them to have a better school. Couldn't we at least give them a better school? I'm asking that instead of our workers being 60 to 80% low and moderate skilled, which they are now, falling behind the rest of the country, that we have 60% high skilled. I'm asking us to become so productive as workers, which we could do through education and training, that you can compete with the low wages. How do you compete with the low wages? High tech, exquisite design, which we've always been great at, and then get more productivity out of an hour's work by this person who's going to be paid a higher wage than the person in Taiwan or the person in Mexico or the person even in France and Italy. And how do you do that? Well, you can increase productivity. No magic to that word. Productivity means the amount of product you get out of a person in 1 hour. You can do it by adding capital, investing money in machines, etc. That 10% increase in capital, productivity goes up 3.6%. You can get it by extending the number of hours, but 10% increase in hours gets you about 4% interest in productivity. Or you can increase education and skill level 10%, then you get 8.6% in productivity. So why don't we educate them in training and train them? Why don't we have the best educated people in the world, which we do not? Why don't you stand up, Mr. President, and say, what I will do with my next 4 years is do for education what John Kennedy did for space. I will make our children, our next generation, the best educated the world has ever seen. They're not now. Some of them don't have a good library. Some of them don't have computers. A lot of the changes we can make without spending money. But I will even spend money, because you'll have to put them on the information superhighway. That's a toll road. Somebody has to pay for the fiber optics. Rudy Giuliani can't. George Pataki can't. And nobody else in this country at the state level can. The federal government's going to have to help. And we can do it the way we did it for space. $277 billion worth, $13.8 billion a year. Why shouldn't we be the best educated in the world? How do you forgive yourself for being behind the Japanese when it comes to math and science, for going to Stuyvesant High School and seeing that 51% of the students are Asian, because they're so much better educated in math and science than the children who came, all of them, out of your system? How do you tolerate that? That's what I want. It's eminently achievable. I want you to do something about the roads and bridges. I want you to do something about health care. Now, I know some of it is going to cost money, but the money is there. Let's be honest. If you told the people the truth, the money would be there. You have over $1.6 trillion. You want to know how to have enough money to invest the way you'd have to invest to give people, the poor and the middle class, more opportunity to rise up in this system. Number one, don't give any massive tax cuts. And there, I think we've gotten smart already. The Republicans said they were going to give you $550 billion in tax cuts, and you knew right away that was not too much. I mean, America has so quickly renounced that promise and that offer from the Republicans that they're switching over to other subjects now in the campaign. So avoid big tax cuts, and then do something about reducing some of your expenditures, getting control of them. The two main ones that you have to deal with, really the three: Social Security, Medicare, and defense. Social Security, Medicare, and defense. If you take Social Security, Medicare, defense, and the money you're paying for your mortgage, the debt service on your $5 trillion in debt, that's 73% of the budget. Medicare, Social Security, defense, and the money you pay on the mortgage. If we could bring down the deficit, control the deficit a little bit, well, then you're controlling the amount of money you're paying out for the mortgage. Defense, you gave $20 billion more to the Pentagon than they asked for. What? $20 billion more than they asked for. Why? Because it was politically good for you. Not because the Pentagon needed it. It was politically good. Well, why don't the Democrats say something about it? Because the Democrats, it's politically good for them too. The president doesn't want to argue about draft, not draft. The issue has gone away. It's not even being discussed. You don't have enough money for education. You don't have enough money for breast cancer. You don't have enough money for health care. You don't have enough money for AIDS research. There are a lot of things you don't have enough money for. You don't have enough money for Head Start. There are people in the streets. You don't know where to put the homeless people. 90,000 students without a classroom. And you tell me you have $20 billion more for defense. Why? Because the only part of government that you think works is the part that can drop a rocket down a smokestack. Make a war if you have to. That you can handle. How dare you? And when did you hear anybody raise the question in this campaign? When did you hear them talking about the cities? When did you hear them talking about what must be done? You haven't. And you won't, but you should. Because the money is there. Social Security and Medicare, what should you do about that? Do me a favor, read the Daily News tomorrow. I have a little column in it that says Social Security and Medicare, you obviously have to deal with them, and you have to deal with them in a hurry, and I hope when Clinton wins, which he will, that's the first thing he does. Social Security and Medicare, what you have to do is talk about one principle to begin with. And it's going to get you into trouble. I know every time I talk about it, it gets me into trouble. and that is you have to put needs before wants. It's very simple. When you did Medicare in 1965, you gave Medicare to everybody, whether they were Donald Trump or some struggling 65-year-old. Everybody gets Medicare. Why? You didn't want to argue about middle class, poor, and cutting lines. And you were the mega economy. You were the richest nation in the world by far. You had no big debt. You had no deficit problem. You were doing fine. You could afford to say, okay, everybody gets the Medicare. You can't afford it anymore. You have a tremendous debt, a tremendous deficit. You can't afford to give me the same Medicare that I would get if I were absolutely destitute. Why should you? Why should you? If I've been lucky enough, because of the miracle of this country, to make the money to provide my own health care, shouldn't you at least say, look, Mario, I don't want to jolt you by taking away this freebie all at once. I'll give you a little bit less. And if it's Social Security, I'll give you a little bit less in the COLA. I'm not saying something that's going to make it hard for you when you're old. Not at all, Mario. You'll do very, very well. But I can save a whole lot of money just by making little reductions in the money that goes to the people who don't really need it. Incidentally, it won't affect you, Mario, because all of this is going to be done prospectively. So you'll live out what's left of your existence. We give you the next 10, 15 years, you'll be all right. Forget about it. We're not even talking about you. We're talking about people like you who will be ready for it because they will have been told. Don't call it a means test because that jangles everybody's nerves. Call it putting needs before wants. This is a want. This is not a necessity for you. So maybe you change the age of Social Security. It won't affect you. Those of you who are there already, it will happen gradually as you did it in 1984. You can save a ton of money. You can save billions of dollars in Social Security and Medicare and then do something about defense, for God's sakes. At least limit yourself to what the experts say that they should have. Everybody, the people who were in the Defense Department with Reagan, who are now at the Brookings Institute, they all tell you you're spending a fortune on defense you don't have to spend. There are billions of dollars there that you could save, billions and billions. Don't do the big tax cuts. Hey, look, the Republicans are saying they have $550 billion that they can give up as government, give back to me and to you, and still balance the budget in 7 years. $550 billion. If the Republicans were right and you didn't do the tax cuts, that's $550 billion. You could have health care, you could have education, you could have a whole new America for $550 billion. And even the Democrats who were giving tax cuts, we shouldn't, but we're giving them. Why? Because it's politics. Because if they give tax cuts and we don't give them, then they're good at tax cuts, we're not, so we'll give you tax cuts too. But you're Democrats. You know that these kids are going without. You know that the middle class is going nowhere. You're telling us you can't do anything about it. Of course you can. Of course you can intervene in the free enterprise system. Listen, from the Constitution for almost 100 years, the first 100 years of America's life, we were told you couldn't do anything about women and children who were working almost like slaves. You couldn't do anything about a worker who had 6 children and who lost his hand in an unprotected machine because the owner didn't give a darn about that worker, and now he can no longer work. There's nothing you can do for him. He depended upon the generosity of the people in his village or some private charity. But there's nothing government can do. Couldn't you give him a little something? Oh, no. There's nothing in the Constitution that says that. Constitution does not say love one another. It does not say help the person who loses his arm. It does not talk about charity. It says freedom, opportunity. It's not in the Constitution. Therefore, we do not do it. And it's not good for America. No workers' compensation, no unemployment insurance, no Social Security, no Medicare, no Medicaid, no civility. Let them die. And they did. The Depression changed that because you suddenly got industrialized and you pushed people into small areas where they could feel and see one another, where all the experiences of life were proliferated, multiplied, intensified. And Roosevelt came and said, hey, look, this isn't going to work. Those people were right about our democracy. We're going down the tubes. We have to invent a new America. We had better start helping one another. We had better start creating programs. Yes, you're doing well. You're still doing well. Fine. Don't mind me. But I'm going to take a little bit of your wealth to create a program, a WPA program, to put people to work, make them work, make them work. We're very responsible people, but we'll give them a little bread, give them a little dignity. We'll save America. And they did. But they were told for 100 years, it can't be done. You're a bunch of communists, a bunch of socialists. Medicare and Medicaid, it can't be done. But it was done. Before them, they told the people who came here in the beginning, it can't be done. They told Andrea and Immaculata Cuomo, it can't be done. If they had taken a poll in Nocera Inferior, Provincia di Salerno, before he left, what is your chance of making it in America? Forget about it. He'd be on a mountain somewhere, or I would, in Salerno, strumming an Italian banjo. We never would have left. This whole place is a miracle created against the probabilities by a whole lot of people who were told it can't be done. And now they're asking me at the end of my life, after I have enjoyed every fruit that this place ever produced, when I have had all the good luck in the world, Mario, relax, keep your mouth shut, don't get aggravated. The middle class are not going to go up the way you would like them to and the way you did. The poor are going to have to learn to live in their misery because there's nothing more we can do. We cannot afford it. $20 billion, yes, more than the Pentagon asked for. Yes, we can do that. Hundreds of billions of dollars in tax cuts, yes, a lot of it, even for guys like you, Mario, who don't need it. Yes, we can do that. But no, we can't do anything about the poor and the middle class. I don't believe it. I don't believe it, and I don't think you should either. You know, Matilda had a birthday yesterday. I won't tell you which one it was, but, you know, and she was all depressed. I told the kids, I said, for God's sake, forget about the damn flowers. Will you do me a favor? Send the flowers to somebody who's sick. Don't send them here for Matilda's birthday. But they sent the flowers anyway. And I had to go all through that. No, you look great. Everybody says you look wonderful. You know, you're not getting old. Boy, you're I had to get off the dance floor. I can't keep up with you. Boy, you're moving around with all those new stuff. Forget, no, you don't have to, no, you don't have to go to any place to do your thing, your skin. It's fine just the way it is. And I said, beside, Matilda, you come up with a new idea every day. You've got your mentoring program, and you've got this, and you're on the phone, and you're thinking this up, and you're thinking that up, and you're going to build this, and you're going to make that. That's the sign. You know what the sign of old age is, Matilda? When you're too fatigued to have an ambition. When you're too tired and worn out to think up a new goal. When you don't feel like doing it anymore. I watched a film of this softball league in Florida. See where these 80-year-old guys play? They have a 70-year-old league, an 80-year-old league. 80 years old, and I'm watching him on television. A little cap guy hits the ball, does those little baby steps down at first base. I said, look at this guy. You know, and then they interview this fella. You had to see this interview. Now, I don't know how old this guy was. And they said, so, Charles, a lot of people die in the dugout. Yeah, they died. Had a guy. Died right next to me. They're sitting right there, just keeled right over. It's gone. How do you feel about that? He said, well, what the hell? The guy was 83, 84. He says, you know, that happens to you sometime. And then he tried to make a single a double, boy. That can get you, you know, when you try to stretch that extra base. Well, what about you? He said, oh, yeah, it could happen to me. And you're not distressed? He said, can you think of a better way of going? He said, no, I'm telling you, I'm going to play. What I want is one more home run. I said, can you, and the guy says, can you hit a home run? He says, yeah, you got to get lucky. You got to get it between two of these guys. He says, and if I'm really lucky, when it goes between them, maybe they'll die. You know? And I said, wonderful, that's what I want. I want to die throwing a hook shot as the ball goes through the basket, you know, and the lights go on. Say, you win by 1 point. Whoop, you drop dead and it's over. But I want to go out with an ambition. I don't want to do that. And for America to be saying to itself, we're too old. We're all used up. We can't do these things. It's too much, too liberal, too progressive. How sick that is, how wrong it is. Do not go gentle into that good night. God forbid, rage against the dying of the light. Dylan Thomas. Yes, sir, that's the way I want to die. And I'm old. America's just a kid, 16 years old, in a world where the nations around them are 80, 70, 60, 50. We're just kids. We're only 200 years old. We haven't even begun, for God's sake. We're the greatest nation the world has ever seen, and we did it with one hand tied behind our back. We didn't use our women fully. We made our blacks animals for much of our history. We're just now giving them a full chance to produce, and they haven't had a full chance yet. Imagine when the African Americans are given their full opportunity, when women are given their full opportunity. Imagine if you could save 20% of the people who are now in jail, get them off drugs and make them productive. Imagine if you did have the greatest educated body of people in world history. Imagine if you had 80% of your people high-skilled workers. Imagine if you did all of that. How great would this place be? That's what I want. That's the ambition I want. Maybe they'll die when you hit the ball between them. One more home run. That's what we should be asking for. What do you think? Thank you. Okay, any questions? Now again, you can ask questions about anything. Remember, I told you, I'm terrific at accepting questions. Yeah. Why is it that I suddenly feel like one of those two guys chasing the ball in the outer? I think I miss public service. I said that to somebody last night at America Online. And they asked me repeatedly about, how you feel about being out of public service. There's nothing in the world like public service. I've had everything else in life, and to be governor is to wake up in the morning and know you will be confronted by and offered an almost infinite number of opportunities to do something useful for somebody. I mean, that's what public service is, a wonderful chance to do good things. And I miss it. I miss it a lot. Running for office is probably unlikely because there are so few things to run for. If you've been governor for 3 terms, you can't go back to that. And then it's difficult to do anything else. The Senate race, they threw my name into a poll for the next Senate race, and then there's going to be one right after that if Senator Moynihan doesn't run. The Senate race has already intrigued a lot of people who are very strong Democrats like Mark Green and who would make good candidates like Geraldine Ferraro and maybe even my son Andrew. I don't know what Andrew is going to do. He hasn't told me, probably doesn't know himself. But I think what I would like to do is stay as active as I can in public life, share as much as I can what I've learned in 20 years, indeed a whole lifetime in this place, but 20 years in public service and 12 years as governor, you can learn a lot. And I feel that the very least what I can do is go back and forth and participate in the process with that. But I want to see what Andrew does and what he chooses to do. If Andrew chooses to go into politics, then he will have one of the most loyal, committed, and experienced assistants in the United States of America. And if you knew Andrew, you would know how easy it is for me to make that judgment. He has all of his mother's great gifts. He's much smarter than I am. He was my campaign manager in 1982. He's a much better political person than I am. I said this about him today, introducing him. There are some people I have met who are very, very good at conceiving ideas, but not so good at implementing them. Management is not their forte. There are other people who are dynamite. If you give them an idea, they can put it together, they can organize the team, they can manage, they can implement. But they're not so good at thinking up ideas. Andrew's one of the very few people I've met who can do both. He really is wonderful at conceiving. He conceived the program for the homeless people called HELP, which brought all sorts of social interventions in and put them in housing for 7 to 9 months and got them ready for outside life and kind of prepared them for a transitional housing program. And he built it. He worked his way through the tortuous bureaucratic and fiscal and economic bureaucracies and got it done. And now his sister Maria is running it with 3 children too. So I want to see what Andrew does. He would be better at it than I could ever be. And having witnessed a lot of the mistakes I made, he could probably, do it with less pain than I experienced. So that's. But I love public service. Yes, ma'am. No, I agree with you. I think I agree that she should be advised. More than that, you should be tougher than that with her. But let's go back to the beginning. First of all, the example you give of 6 children is not a typical example. It's much more like 2, but the point you make is a good one. What she is doing is inappropriate. To say wrong gets me into morality. I don't know whether it's a sin or not. I don't know what God would say about the circumstances that produced her judgment in the first place. And I would say that I bear a lot of responsibility. And I let every citizen speak for himself or herself, but I bear a lot of the responsibility for what happened to her because she's the product of the judgments I made in social policy throughout my lifetime. Now, maybe not me personally, but as a group. We decided to jam them all into a small area. We invented zoning, 5 acres in some places, 4 acres, 3 acres, or even in Queens, you need a certain number of feet for a house because we don't want to crowd ourselves. But when it came to the poor people, we decided to pile them on top of one another so that they lived hundreds of thousands to the inch in places where there weren't enough jobs, there weren't enough schools, there wasn't enough of anything. We doomed them almost by the way we provided for their living conditions. And so what I'm saying is we bear some of the responsibility. We must do something about it. What should you do about it? Of course, you must be as tough as you can be with her to discipline her, to teach her the right way. But you also have to give incentives. You also have to give her another avenue to dignity. And that's what I call the program that I conceived of in 1984, that took children who had children, first one, put them into a program. We did this with Sister Serena Branson, a Roman Catholic nun in Albany, and it was a real big step for the Catholic Church to get involved in this at all. And I couldn't have done it down here, but you could do it in Albany with the bishop there at the time. We took these children, and we said, look, we're putting you into a program. Here's what we'll do for you. First of all, give me the name of the father. I want to know who the guy was. Why? Because he has a responsibility, and we can't leave that out of the equation. We can't let the guys get the impression that they can just make babies and keep score. I've got 10, there's something wrong about that. And also, as a practical matter, this guy may be 28 years old, because, a lot of them have the person that they couple with is considerably older than they are. Number 2, promise me you're not going to make another baby, because if you do, you're out of this program. While you're in this program, no other baby. Number 3, promise me and agree to go to school, get your GED. We'll give you daycare if that's what you need. We use some of the mothers, incidentally, to watch other mothers' babies, but we'll take care of the child. You get your degree. Then agree to work. We're going to take your welfare check, and we're going to tear it in half, and we're going to give half to Hank Greenberg at one of his insurance companies, and the other half you keep. And we'll say to Hank, you hire her. This goes toward her salary, just as an inducement. Then you work there. You make progress. Don't have a baby. Get your schooling. Learn. You'll see those beautiful fingers of yours after a while will handle a computer. You'll get so good that you'll get raises. And once you start to feel surer about yourself, you're not going to want to make the baby. You can make the babies later. Maybe you'll get lucky. Maybe you'll move out of this neighborhood. Maybe you'll find a neighborhood where there are some young people your age. Maybe you'll be able to find a husband. But anyway, stay in the book. 66 2/3 reduction in birth rate in that program. It works, but it takes an awful lot of patience, and you have to make an investment. And you have to understand why they make the baby in the first place. It is not for the check. Now, maybe some, is that part of the consideration? Yes, maybe. But if you take that away, that doesn't guarantee they won't make the babies. If you go down south now to some of the states which for years and years have given very little money for welfare, they lead the league in making babies, because there are other ways to get money to provide for that child. You don't have to get a welfare check. You can do a lot of things. You can sell your body. You can do drugs. You can do a lot of things. So it's not as easy as saying, that's it, sweetheart. Eat that chopsteak right now or you're out of here. Or that's it, pal. One more Chesterfield cigarette and you're no longer my son. I wish it were that easy. We could solve an awful lot of problems. All you'd have to do is be tough, right? Be tough. Build prisons. If that's all it took, how come I built 61,000 prisons and there's not enough room in the prisons for the people who are committing crimes now? It is not enough just to be tough. You have to give incentives. That's all I'm saying. But I'm not, I won't use the word forgive, because it's not for me to blame. I'm not good enough to blame them. I would say their conduct is inappropriate. It's not good for the society, and probably not good for them. And a lot of them learn that in a hurry and say they don't have 6 kids, because a lot of them, after the first kid, they find out how difficult it is. They find out what changing diapers means. Certainly by the second kid, and you see a big fall off with them. And if you talk to the pros, that's what they'll tell you. Yes. Yes, ma'am. Joe Bellicose, right? I should have written more long letters. Thank you very much. Yes, ma'am. Are we voting the issues anymore? Are we voting the personalities? I believe one of the big problems we have is that fewer people are voting than should, and the people who are voting aren't studying the issues and don't know the issues the way they should. That's not true, probably, of the group here. See, 92nd Street Y, incidentally, I don't know if you know what you are, but those of us who know this place and know it from the seats out there and from the stage up here, a lot of us, like myself, go all over the United States of America. And when you talk about culture, et cetera, and they want to talk about New York, I said, you should go to the 92nd Street Y. You are an extraordinary bunch of people. The people who come to this kind of thing here in New York are way ahead of most of the population in the United States of America. That doesn't mean we're better. It might mean we're luckier because we have the surroundings. You've got the Y. You've got a lot of people who will come and share with you. But you know a lot more about the issues than most people take the time to learn. And that is a serious problem. But I think the bigger problem is that the politicians have now decided that they want so much to stay in office that they will do whatever you ask them to, maybe in your ignorance, maybe in a poll, whatever you say to them in a poll, they're going to do. Why? Because they want to stay in office, even if they think you're right. Therefore, when they take a poll and it says, if you don't give tax cuts, then we're going to kick you out of office. If you don't give us a death penalty, we're going to kick you out of office. If you don't, even if they're against the death penalty, against the tax cuts, they're going to say, give them the death penalty, give them the tax cuts. That's what they want. This is a bad example, but to the extent that leadership requires that you take people down an unpopular path, we are losing that altogether. The shepherds are becoming members of the flock. You know, they're going where the sheep want to go. They ask the sheep, where would you like to nibble tonight? That's where we go, you know. And that's all right until you get to the edge of the cliff. And that's what's happening in the country. You know, think of it this way. Popularity has become the suffocating criterion. Popularity is all that counts. Now, can you be a really good teacher without occasionally being unpopular with a student? Not really. I taught for a long time. Every once in a while you have to jolt them. Every once in a while you have to be tough. Every once in a while you have to fail somebody. Can you be a really good coach without occasionally making your players do things they don't want to do? And I don't think so. Can you be a really good parent? No, definitely not. You cannot be a good parent and do everything they ask you to do. Forget about it. We come very close, most of it, you know, giving them everything they want. How could you be a good president or a good congressman, giving them everything they want? But that's what's happening. See, I don't believe for a moment that the Democrats who were saying to us from the Congress, we have learned our lesson. We know that we can't give you any of those big programs. You know, we're only going to give you little itty-bitty programs because we learned our lesson. They know you can't solve the health care problem with a little bitty program. Portability of health care is wonderful. Portability of health care. I lose this job, I go to another job. If I can afford it, I can have that policy. Terrific. But what about the guy who never could afford the policy to begin with? How about the 40 million people out there who don't have insurance? You can't get there from here with only popular programs. Somebody's going to have to stand up at one point and say to the American people, and I think they're ready for it. I think they were ready for it in 92. I think for a moment, just a moment, they were ready for it from Perot. But he blew it. I think the American people are very eager for something other than the Democrats and the Republicans. I think they are very eager for somebody somewhere that stands up and says, hey, look, this is the absolute truth, and I couldn't give two darns whether you accept it or not. That's, you know, Colin Powell is very significant. What the American people want, I believe, is first strength. You have to be strong to lead Americans because they're strong. But Americans are also frightened by strength. Why? Because they know what happens when you couple it with harshness. Because they're Jews. And they've been driven all over the world by harsh strength. Or they're the sons and daughters of immigrants. And they know vulnerability. They know what it is not to speak the language, not to understand. And they know that harshness often victimizes the most vulnerable. And the sons and daughters of immigrants like Cuomo's. I mean, I remember, I'll never be able to shake the impression of my father in tears. The only time we ever saw him cry was when he talked about education. The man's vulnerability, couldn't write the damn language. Now that stays with you. And he came from a place where probably for 1,000 years and more, he and my mother's family had to live off the ground. They had to survive on that mountain in Salerno somehow. I mean, there was never an easy moment for them. You do that for 1,000 years, and it creates a kind of vulnerability. So we are leery about strength. That's why Gingrich went down so fast. He was perceived as harsh strength. What do we want? We want strength with sweetness. That's Buddha. That's Maimonides. That's, for me, Jesus. That's Eisenhower. That's Colin Powell. Strength? Of course. He's a general. Are you kidding? He's a general. Look at him. He must be strong. But he's sweet too. Why? He's black. He's vulnerable. He had to fight his way. Believes in affirmative action. Believes in the welfare. Has the courage to say, look, you're going too far. Sweet strength. That could win. That could win. They saw Perot as strong. But then some eccentric behavior, and, he blew it. No. I like him. I really like him. Can I tell you a story about Perot? Do you have time for a story about Perot? 1991, only Republicans are speaking to the Fortune 500 in Charleston, I think, or somewhere down south. Charlottesville or Charleston, I forget. And so they invite me to speak, and I went and I spoke, and they put it on C-SPAN. And it was a speech about the economy. And I came back and had a phone conversation with Ross. I saw that speech. I thought it was a great speech on the economy. I said, yeah, well, Ross, it's the same speech you'd give. It said the same thing. I came for a capital gains tax cut, investment credits at that time, talked about dealing with the deficit. And I said, geez, Ross, I really wish you would talk about this a lot. He said, well, you talking about it, you're doing pretty good. I said, yeah, but when I talk about it, I'm a politician. They think I want to run for president. I'm not running for president. But I'm not credible because I'm a politician. You, on the other hand, made $1 billion or whatever it is. You've never run for office. Everybody trusts you. You have to speak about it. You should be on the Larry King show. Well, I was on Larry King's show, but he won't put me on again. I said, why not? He says, well, he says, once is enough. I said, let me talk to Larry. Hello, Larry. Yeah. When are you coming to my show, Mario? He's an old friend of mine from Brooklyn. I said, I don't want to go on your show. You got to have Ross Perot. He says, what do I have to have Ross Perot for? I had him. I said, because he's credible on this subject. We're all politicians. Nobody believes us. We have to make the economy the issue. This guy can do it. Yeah, but he wants to run for president. He doesn't want to run for president. He told me he doesn't want to run for president. Put him on one more time. Please, Larry. No, I don't want to put him on. The hell with you. I'm never going to go on your show. All right. He said, but next thing you know, you'll break my kneecaps. He's always making fun about Italians, Larry said. So he puts Perot on the show. Now, I don't know if you remember the show, but Ross was on the show, and somewhere in the first quarter or something, they started asking questions, and somebody said, why don't you run for president? Well, I don't know. If you put me on a ballot in 50 states, then maybe I will. And Larry said, time out, And he said to Perot, what, in the break, he said, well, he said, well, I didn't say I was running. I believe the man did it from his heart. I don't believe he went in with a plan. I believe what happened is some guy said, will you run? It occurred to him, if you put me on the ballot in 50 states, I'll run. I really do. And that's the way he ran. But I think what your question was, are we on the issues? No, we're not on the issues. We're not even close to the issues. Everybody knows it. That's the irony here. I mean, if you stop people in the street, even people who haven't had the chance to learn the issues, but if you stop them and spent an hour and had a cup of coffee with them and said, may I go over something with you? Because I know a lot about this stuff. I've had a chance to study it. Here are some problems. The working class, over 90% of the people in this country either are not working although they want to, they're poor and unemployed, or are working but are struggling. Like half of them make their families, I'm not talking about individuals, $35,000 or less. Now, by the time you take the taxes out, how do you live? How do you send your kid to college? How do you do your health care? How do you take vacations? How do you get a house? How do you have any degree of comfort? How do you do it if you want to have a family? Now that's the problem. Now we have tremendous wealth and we have this big deficit because we're spending money badly, and we have a lot of programs like Medicare that, frankly, we spend some of the money on people who don't need it. Now, don't you think these are things we should? And plus, drugs. We're not doing anything about drugs. We keep saying about drugs that we have to have more police, more prisons, more executions. And everybody knows, every cop knows that's not the answer. You go to a law enforcement person here or in Duluth, and you say to them, do you think you should have more cops? They'll say yes. You say to them, do you think you should have more prisons? They'll say yes. Do you think you should have more courts? Yes. The whole legal justice system, you should have more of that. Terrific. Do you think that'll solve the problem? Absolutely not. It says the only way to solve it is from the demand side. You have to stop the kids and the others from wanting to take the stuff in the first place. And that means you have to affect their motivation. And that means you have to discipline them, yes. Instruct them, teach them, yes, every way you can, that drugs are bad. But then you have to give them alternatives. You have to say, look, this drug is going to lead you into a terrible way of life. Here's another avenue to dignity. Here's an alternative. The best thing you could do for the kid from South Jamaica right now, if you had to pick one, a beautiful new school. You've got a family here of experts. You've got the Fruscias down here. I don't want to embarrass them. Sandy never objects to having his name mentioned, but Sandy Fruscia is here. He was in charge of the school construction authority that we created. You ask Sandy what the disaster is in our schools now. Best thing you could do for kids in this place in South Jamaica, give them what you gave Colin Powell, Bill Clinton, even Bob Dole from Russell, Kansas, and Mario Cuomo, a good schoolhouse with a library, with teachers, with a civilized size, with a good education. That's the best thing you can do. And everybody knows it. You said that to people that all understand. Last question. Yes, sir. Last question of the night. Here we go. Lie to them. Lie to them. Well, no, the biggest mistake is to lie to yourself, which we're beginning to do in this country. I think we a lot of us, he said, what's the biggest mistake you can make in dealing with people? And I'm saying now, lie to yourself. And I think we are lying to ourselves. I think a lot of us like the idea that you can't do anything about this middle class and poor problem because that relieves us of the burden. You see, it's what Reagan did when he said to the middle class and to the rich in this country, don't worry about the poor. We tried it. It doesn't work. Don't feel bad about them. We tried it. It does not work. Then a lot of people said, oh, gee, I used to feel a little guilty that if I didn't give it to them, they'd starve. Now, president's telling me no. And look at this president. He looks like St. Francis of Assisi. The guy's wonderful. He got a nice smile. No, he was a magnificently non-menacing person. Oh, President Reagan, I saw him in 6 movies. Now, wait a minute. In 4 of them, he loved somebody like Jane Wyman and was going to marry her. And then somebody like Tyrone Power intervenes, and she falls in love with him, and he winds up as the best man. Did you ever see that? He always was. He was always there. The best man, wonderful smile. But he, that making the denial of compassion respectable was a great Reagan legacy. And I think a lot of Americans are lying to themselves now. A lot of Americans are feeling, hey, look, that's right. There's nothing you can do, therefore, why should I try? That is not the truth. There is a lot you can do. You have to do it intelligently. You shouldn't waste money. We all work very hard. I'm not talking about wasting money. But there are intelligent investments we must make that we are refusing to make, and that's the mistake. You had a second part, and this is the end. I really don't know. I just lost an election, remember? But I lost the election by telling the first truth, which was, not lie to her. I have to tell you this, then we really have to go. My mother, and telling the truth. I'm running against Ed Koch. It's a very old story. I'm running against Ed Koch. It's 1977. He's going into the senior citizen centers. He lets me go in first. The first question they asked us, it was son of Sam, Berkowitz. Berkowitz was killing the little girls. First question always was death penalty, and I would say, well, I'm against boo, and the old people, they call me names and they curse. And then Koch would come and says, he's against the death penalty. I'm for the death penalty. That was all over, So my mother comes to me, and she says in Italian, you don't want the death penalty. I said, no. She says, Koch, he won the death penalty. I said, yes, I know. A woman came to me in the store and says, how come your son is so big and so strong, he's so stupid and so weak? You have to have the death penalty. You have to kill them. They're animals. I said, Mom, please don't talk that way. And I'm against the death penalty because, boo. I gave her, the whole litany. I hit her with everything. And she says, I don't care. Koch, you're going to win. You're going to lose. You got to be for the death penalty. I says, I won't do it. Do you want your son to twist his soul to win this election? She says, you don't have to lose. I said, what do you mean I don't have to lose? She says, here's what you do. You tell him you won the death penalty. After you win, forget about it. Thank you very, very much. Thank you.